Hello and welcome to Are You Ready for That Grant? What you need to know and consider before you get started. Have you ever launched into something without realizing just how big the consequences are? What does it mean to get a grant for the first time? What difference is that going to make to your organization, your club, your business? Are you ready for change? Are your colleagues ready for change? And what does it mean to get the big one? You may be used to getting small grants and you slowly growing and growing your portfolio, and then suddenly you get this really big one. And what difference is that going to make? Hello, my name is Pat Grosse, and I have nearly 30 years experience of working in the grants field in one form or another. I've worked on both sides of the funding fence, both in the UK and in Australia. I've been involved in all aspects of funding, from designing the program, designing the guidelines, selection criteria, setting up the application templates and software, to being on the other side and applying for funding on behalf of clients. My organisation is a community entrepreneur, and this year I aim to create a list of 5,000 people and organisations out there in the community who are creating change for the better. So what will you learn from this three-part presentation? I will show you what grants are and how they fit into the big picture. Because once you know this, it is easier to answer the criteria questions. And it also raises questions for you as to, is this what we should be doing? In the second section, we'll be looking at how to put together a business case before you start looking for a grant, about being clear and specific increases the strength of your argument for a grant, if it is a grant you need. And in the third segment, what a grant really means for your people, for your systems, your processes, and your contractual obligations. This is important for beginners and those thinking about stepping up to the next level. So let's start with the first question. What grants are and how they fit into the big picture. Once you know this, it's easier to answer the criteria questions. So the first question is, what is a grant? Well, I can tell you it is not a handout. Those are donations. A grant is an agreement between your entity, however that may look, and a funder to deliver a project that helps them to achieve an outcome. For instance, if you're applying for funding from government, for example, the grant is the funding mechanism to operationalize their policy directions and their outcomes. So you may have an outcome that may say, we want to grow jobs in regional areas, and the outcome is so many jobs developed over a period of time, and those jobs are sustainable, and people are still in employment 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, whatever afterwards. So that's their big vision, their big goal. But they're not able to achieve that on their own. So they're looking for organizations, in this case businesses, that can come in and come up with some ideas and how to generate, or not ideas, but actually implement some initiatives on the ground to find employment or to create employment opportunities. And the same when you're looking in the community space. It may be that there are maybe some huge social issues in low socioeconomic areas. Could be that in recent years there's been a profile on domestic violence. And so there is a whole policy at the state or the national level concerning addressing the issues of domestic violence, because a benefit of being able to address those issues for the government is that it reduces health costs, and there's lots of longer term issues which can be stemmed, not just in terms for the government and its welfare requirements, but also is fantastic benefits for the people themselves, of course. So they have this whole idea, this whole vision, this whole goal of what they want to achieve, but they may not be able to do that themselves on the ground. So that's when they put out the funding mechanism, which is putting out calls for funding. It's grants, and that's what it is. So that when you are applying, you do not approach your application as though they're giving you funding to do what you want to do. It's about how you can achieve or contribute to the achievement of the goals that they're looking for. And so it's important that you consider that you approach an application as a pitch, how what you're proposing to do helps their big picture. So how do you pitch? It's common sense. Do your homework. Look at the guidelines. In those guidelines, they'll show you clues or linkages to policies, objectives, outcomes, aims. Attend webinars or briefings. There is a document called Frequently Asked Questions where somebody would have asked a question after the guidelines have been issued, and in all fairness to everybody, a list would have been started with a question and the answer given, and that would have been made available to everybody. So that's why it's called Frequently Asked Questions. But you look in the Frequently Asked Questions, you look at previously successful applicants, there's quite a bit of work that you can do that's going to give you those clues as to what the terminology is, what they want, what they're looking for. And as I said, check all references to policy frameworks, aims, objectives, and outcomes. Get the highlighter out, read the policy frameworks, or do what I do and read the summary pages. Ensure your objectives and outcomes meet theirs, because your objectives and outcomes for your program don't have to be 100% aligned to theirs. They have to meet theirs, but you're going to have some differences anyway, because you're a different organization. You've got different needs, different goals. And also, when you are pitching, answer the criteria. Now, an application for a grant tends to follow a standard format. In the main, at the front end, is all the information about who you are, your organization, who's responsible, address, contact information, although I call that the administrivia. And then in the middle, that's where you've got the criteria questions. Those questions about, what's the need that you can help us to resolve, specifically in what you want to do in that area where your expertise will come in this segment. That's going to cover the outcomes. It's going to be looking at what you propose to do and how you propose to do it and who you propose, not necessarily people, but the roles, positions, expertise, skills. What are you bringing to the table? Are you bringing partnerships to the table, and who are these partners? It could be questions, answers to questions around risk management. Have you thought about the risks? Also, there's the question around how do you know you've been successful? Now, the key here, as I said, I've just given you a general overview, but the key here is answer the questions. Now, if you're a small and you first timer, and I've seen this a lot because I've seen many application forms come across my desk in previous roles, is that some people just want to write down what they want to do. That's it. It's about their tunnel vision, what they want to do. They're not answering the questions. And that then, obviously, each question gets marked, scored against some criteria independently of the other questions. So it's important that you clearly answer that question, even if you think that you are duplicating some information that you've put in the previous question. That's fine. As I said, each question is assessed independently in most cases. So it's important that you answer the question. And as I said, I've seen this both in the UK and in Australia, where people are just tempted to put down what they think. Another area to be mindful of is there's always going to be a question that identifies that you understand what that need is. Now, do not assume that the funder, even if they do, understands that, you know, the demographic of your area or the tourism needs of your area or whatever it is, and they know that, but you've got to put it down specifically in the application form. And when you're answering the criteria and you're trying to, as I say, pitch that you understand the need, use specifics. Use specific data with a little bit of, you know, story or proof, social proof we call it, of somebody who's, you know, impacted by this or something that's happened maybe. But at the end of the day, you've got to demonstrate that you understand the population, the opportunity, and you've got to use the figures. And what happens is that somewhere along the line, if it's government, the Auditor General will come along 2, 3, 4, 5 years in the future and look at how the process for assigning grant funding from grant applications took place. And if you, even though they may know, your desk officer or the funding body knows what the demographic is like, they cannot accept an application or should not accept an application which doesn't give specific sort of understanding and specific data. Because, as I said, the Auditor General will come along and you'll go, well, why did you do that and not that? And if it's generalizations, they're going to be asking questions. Because I can tell you now that in some areas, the demographic, for example, this is a classic here, the demographic might change in a period of 5 years. I was looking at a project in Sydney where a whole area had gone from being deprived and, you know, so low socioeconomic to being gentrified in that period of time. So coming along in the future and you go, well, why on earth did you fund here? Not realizing that 5 years ago it was a different demographic altogether. So be very specific and always act in the here and now, and this is why. And then show them what you're doing is different, that it's new, that it's actually a project and not business as usual, and that you are the right choice to address this problem. It could be that you bring in partners, but also show that there's nobody else in your area doing what you're doing. As I mentioned already, unmet need. Look for the evidence of the unmet need. This refers also to who out there is doing something or not doing what you want to do. Make sure that you've got a workable plan with the right resources to make it work. Now, if you're doing this for the first time, you sort of think, oh, well, we'll do this, this, and this, and you've probably got a whole idea of what you want to do in your head. But in reality, I would sit down as a group of people and basically unpack task by task, or even section by section, and then task by task. It's called a work breakdown structure. But do that. And the great thing about it is that once you start to unpack, you realize what's involved in time, resources, funding, and therefore you're going to be able to put together a well thought out, rounded application that's more likely to get funded. Do you have a previously good record? You may have been running projects in the past. They want to know that. The funder wants to know that they can they feel safe, that the money is in the right place. Include some social proof. Get testimonials, you know, letters of support, examples or case studies if you can. depending on how, you know, in what is allowed in the application, but show that you are of good repute and you've done this before, etc. And that you've considered risks and that you know how to prove how effective your project has been. And of course, finally, a budget that works. And the budget that tells the story of the application, I mean, that is one I used to find a lot, is that I would read the story and then look at the budget. And in some cases, I would find that the budget didn't quite match what they wanted to do in the project. And that's just one angle. Another angle with the budget is that you just guess and you haven't unpacked the project and you just guessed how much it's going to cost, and you find you get the funding, especially if you think, oh, this is good value for money, if the funder thinks that, and then you find that actually it is good value for money for them, but it's totally unworkable for you, and you find that it's quite an embarrassing situation to be in. But effectively, your pitch is a business plan. And I say that a grant application is also a marketing plan on steroids. So now we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves. And so in part 2, we'll take a step back and look at what applying for a grant will mean for you before you dive in there.